Okay, good morning. This is Mrs. Standridge. I'm back again to read chapter 2 of Elijah of Buxton. Um, Last time we talked about point of view, who's telling the story, and I asked you to look for clues of who was telling the story in Elijah of Buxton. And by listening to the story, you should have been able to figure out that the point of view of this story person, because Elijah, the main character of the story, is the person telling the story, and we know that because he uses the word I a lot. The person narrating the story uses the word I. I gotta say, I was real proud of Ma. 2 days later, I got back from helping Mr. Leroy. So there's a lot of clues in there that tell. So Elijah is the main character of the story, and he's telling us this story from his point of view. All right, let's go ahead and we'll get started with chapter 2. Chapter 2 is titled Me and Mr. Frederick Douglass. So for those of you who might not be aware, Frederick Douglass was a real person. You might be thinking this is a fictional book, so how can it have a real person? Well, the genre of this book is historical fiction. And historical fiction, although it's not true, it can have elements of actual historical events and real people who lived in history. So this Frederick Douglass was a real person. He was a former slave who was very well educated, and he was what's called an abolitionist. He fought for the freedom of other slaves. So let's find out about Elijah and Mr. Frederick Douglass. About the only good thing that came from Ma's snake in the cookie jar lesson was there weren't no one else around to see it, not even Cooter. It wouldn't have been no time at all before everyone in the settlement knowed about what happened. And even if Cooter and me are best friends and he wouldn't do nothing to on purpose make me look low, I know that me running off from that snake like I done was such a good story that even a best friend couldn't have been blamed for letting it accidentally slip out, especially a best friend like Cooter. The whole adventure would just turn into another one of them things that would be stuck onto my name forever. And doggone it all, seems like what people enjoy sticking to your name permanent ain't never good things. They're always tragical. I ain't the kind of person that complains for no reason, but I gotta say, I already got one tragedy tied up with my name that is so horrible that it wouldn't be one bit fair that I'd get another. The tragedy that's so horrible put a scar on me that I'm going to be carrying till the day I die. You'd think grown folks would cry when they saw me, but that don't happen at all. Even Ma and Pa try to act like it ain't all that noticeable and that they ain't ashamed to have folks see they're raising me, but I know better. It happened when I warn't nothing but a baby, and I can't see why I'm to blame, but that's when the famousest, smartest man who ever escaped from slavery stood on a tall stage that had got built in the schoolhouse and raised me way up over his head in front of a crowd of people. From the way Pa tells it, the man must have had me 20 feet up in the air. He was giving a speech when the accident happened, because every time he made a point, he'd give me a little shake way up there over top of his head. I weren't even a year old back when Mr. Frederick Douglass and Mr. John Brown visited Buxton. Pa said all the settlement people had got excited and worked up something terrible about them coming and were dashing round trying to polish Buxton up, sort of like the way you'd rub the dirt off your Sunday shoes if you knowed Mr. Travis was going to give 'em a hard look. They rushed to get the new schoolhouse finished so's there'd be a place big enough for the meeting. They made sure the picket fences in front of everyone's home had got a good slap of whitewash on 'em. They made all kinds of food and such, and they even had a special blanket made out of a out of sewed together flowers to go cross Flapjack the mule's back so's he could lead the parade. All this fussing was going on because folks in Buxton were going to celebrate 3 special people at this big meeting. Special person number 1 was Mr. Frederick Douglass, because he used to be a slave, just like most of the folks here in Buxton. And now they say he can talk the bees out of flying to the flowers. Special person number 2 was Mr. John Brown, because folks say, other than maybe Reverend King, the man who started Buxton, there weren't no white man ever made that was better than him. And special person number 3 was me, 'cause it ain't something I ever boast on, but I was the very first child to be born free in the Elgin settlement at Raleigh in Canada West, what we call Buxton. Mrs. Guest, who's the best sewer and knitter in the settlement, had even gone and knitted some fancy clothes for me that Ma still keeps in a peculiar smelling box made out of cedar wood. Me and Ma have a pretty good disagreement about them clothes, 'cause to me they look a powerful lot like a girl's dress and bonnet. When I got grown enough to understand what it was they'd paraded me round in, I was just as much shamed about the clothes they forced me to wear as I was about the accident twixt me and special person number 1. Pa said everything was all right with the celebrating until the parade got to the schoolhouse and most of the speechifying was over. That's when Mr. Douglass came and took me from Ma and walked high up on the stage with me and held me up in the air over his head. Ma said she was worrying right off, 'cause Mr. Douglass is an excitable man when he gets talking, and he started bouncing me up and down and swinging me round with joy, saying I was a shining beacon of light and hope for the future. I asked Ma what that meant, and she couldn't say. Don't seem to me that getting called a piece of meat off of a pig is anything you should get excited about. But Mr. Douglass thought that it was great, and folks kept cheering, and he kept tossing me up and down till the accident happened. Ma says even back then I was a fragile child, and the more he tossed me, the more she was fretting. She said I was having a whole lot of fun, then I smiled real big, and without no kind of warning at all, the accident happened. I throwed up everything I'd et all over Mr. Douglass's beard and jacket. I learnt from Ma that people who used to be slaves love prettying up any kind of story. She says talking is near the only thing they used to get to do without no white person telling them how or when, so they made the most out of it once they get the chance. She says they loved making a summer day a lot hotter than it really was, or making rain or drought last a whole lot longer than they really did. And they especially loved telling you how their great-great-grandpa or grandma used to be the king or queen of Africa. Bad as my luck is, the people that live in Buxton ain't choose to pretty up the fact I'm most proud of myself for, my rock chunking. They've prettified what happened twixt me and Mr. Frederick Douglass. They'll tell you I throwed up on Mr. Douglass for a whole half a hour afore Ma came and snatched me away and pointed me out the schoolhouse window. They say I near drowned the man. Some folks swear I throwed up so hard that desks and chairs rose up and floated out of the schoolhouse. Mr. Polite said I throwed up so plentiful that didn't no deers nor rabbits die in the woods for 5 years after. He said the bears and wolves ate my vomit for that long, since it was considerable easier for them to do that than to try to run down some animal that weren't looking to get ate. And that don't make no sense. That don't make no sense at all. First off, 'cause they're always telling us how smart Mr. Frederick Douglass is. They tell us he can talk Greek like a Greek and Latin like a Latin. And anybody who's that smart ain't going to sit and hold no baby over his head that's throwing up on him for no whole half an hour. I could understand it if he was surprised at first. Ain't no one going to expect to get throwed up on by a baby boy in a girl's dress and bonnet. But if Mr. Douglass is near smart as folks say, seems to me he'd have had the sense to aim me out the window himself. Seems to me if I really did throw up for a whole half an hour, only the first 5 minutes would have been on Mr. Douglass. The last 20 minutes would have had to be out that window. It also don't make no sense about the bears and wolves neither. 'Cause if they were coming into the settlement 3 times a day to eat what I'd throwed up, this would have been a mighty unsafe place. But didn't none of the grown folks act worried about sending their children off to do no chores? Back when I was about 5 or 6, Ma told me to fetch a bucket and go into the woods behind our home and pick her some blueberries. This is probably one of the reasons Ma thinks I'm a fragile boy. I remember soon she told me to go, I got all afeared and shakety. I said, by myself? She said, it ain't that far, Elijah. I'ma keep watch over you. But Ma, what about all those bears and wolves? What if I'm out there when they come for their supper? She smiled and said, Elijah, don't be silly. Ain't no wild creatures like that been seen round these parts since afore you was born. I said, but Ma, how come everybody keeps telling me about what I done to Mr. Douglas that got all the bears and wolves coming to the settlement looking for something to eat? She laughed and told me some of that grown folks talk, some of that talk that makes it so's you ain't never sure about much of nothing. She said, son, you got one of them sets of mind what's gonna have you fretting about the littlest things. Life's gonna be a tough row to hoe for you if you don't learn you can't be believing everything folks tell you, not even grown folks. One minute Ma, who's got a good head for thinking, tells me I got to respect everything what grown folks say, and the next minute she's wanting me not to believe some of the things the same grown folks tell me. If that don't leave you scratching your head, you got a better brain than me. Okay. Well, I don't know. I think maybe Elijah might have a point there. What do you think? Have you ever been confused by some of the things that grown-ups say? One minute they're telling you one thing and next minute they're telling you something else? Yeah, that can be kind of confusing. If you have something like that, if you can make a connection to this text and how Elijah's feeling, make a comment on this if your parents will let you. Or I'll post this in Google Classroom and you can comment on it there. If you have any questions or you're not sure what's going on with the story, please make a comment and I'll be glad to try and answer it. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and read chapter 3 of Elijah of Buxton tomorrow. I hope to see you then. Bye.